Holy murder. Holy homicide. Holy felony.
The encoding process, which created these genre-based conventions, the same bat time, same bat channel structure that existed in the children's Western, is what enabled these children to treat the show as a sort of game.
The good guys wore the white hats.
She got the room tone? I think she got the room tone. Mic check, 1 2 1 2. Is she sweating today? She's not sweating today. We good? We good. Gucciana? Gucci-lenya. Hello and welcome to Drapetomania, where I make my way unguided and ill-informed through art history, visual culture, and critical theory. If you happen to watch the last video covering Stuart Hall's Encoding, Decoding the Television Discourse, we're dealing with how the raw reality of daytime melodrama misaligns with the tropes and stylizations that constitute genre more generally. And in this section, we'll see how the deployment of genre affects the way that audiences decode the tabloid television show. Like in the last video, I am trying out the 15-minute fantasy, follow the analytics, shorter videos, maybe more successful. And my Twitter, my Instagram, Patreon, the links is out here. Little is better than your direct engagement with likes, subscribes, and comments to help me make this a better experience for both of us. On top of this, you can join me and my very generous patrons on Patreon, where I post content early, make source documents available, where I can more directly focus on the content of the essay, and posting content that doesn't do too well on YouTube. And if you watch the whole thing, you'll get the whole picture. It's good for me and you. All right. Yeah, so back to the content.
A great thing to happen out for someone. Come in for a few minutes. We'll be back live here and also...
As a real good girl, always home, don't go nowhere. As soon as I was introduced to carnival, they say I
Contributing to the delinquency of minors.
Before this message can have an effect, however defined, or satisfy a need or be put to a use, it must first be perceived as a meaningful discourse and meaningfully decoded. It is this set of decoded meanings which have an effect, influence, entertain, instruct, or persuade, with very complex perceptual, cognitive, emotional, ideological, or behavioral consequences. Girl, on Long Wednesday, like the clauses. Santa in this bitch. Dash your Prancer. And that brings us to the final section in this essay, the decoding process, where the audiences make sense of what they're seeing on screen. And in this section, we're going to focus on the distinctions between what's intended in the encoding process and what comes out in the decoding process. So earlier, I made the somewhat provocative assertion that the paternity test segments resonated very strongly with the rhetoric of the welfare queen. It could even be said that I claimed that the shows were about, or somehow validated the rhetoric around welfare reform. But you would hardly believe the shows become so popular if they explicitly marketed themselves as a CIA-funded psyop to shift funds away from welfare toward an impending war in the Middle East. And the shows were popular. So what did the audience think was happening on screen? What was happening in the boardrooms where they pitched the show? And how can we prove what it means? Turns out you can't.
There will never be a finally settled, fixed meaning. The one thing you can say is that there is no one true fixed meaning.
And no one can, not even the producers. Even if we got access to the obscure industry journals and had authorial intent guide us, you can't really trust that what they think is going to happen when people watch it.
No one's watching because of me. They're watching because the stories are crazy and the people are outrageous.
And the representation, since they're likely to be very different as you move from one person to another, one group or another, one part of society and another, one historical moment and another, just as those forms of representation will change, so the meaning of the event will change.
Audiences decode messages according to certain codes. Throughout reuse and reinforcement, some codes become more or less invisible. They begin to disappear as codes and emerge as common sense. Revealing these unmarked codes is like the whole point of puns and knock-knock jokes. And these common sense codes are what the essay calls dominant or hegemonic codes. The codes that are seen as primary and reflect the dominant ideology, among other things. When the viewer takes the connoted meaning from, say, a television newscast or current affairs program, full and straight, and decodes the message in terms of the reference code in which it has been encoded, we might say that the viewer is operating inside of the dominant code.
It can be changed. It can only be changed if it cannot finally be fixed. But the attempt to fix it is why power intervenes in representation at all. They want the relationship between the image and a powerful definition of it to become naturalized, so that that is the only meaning it can possibly carry. Whenever you see that, you will think that. Whenever you see those people, you will assume they have those characteristics. That's what ideology tries to do.
A dominant reading of these shows would say that they're clearly about the shameful excesses of American life.
My name is Victoria, and I'm 15 15 years old, and I don't care what my mama says, I'm gonna have a baby.
It's obvious that a man should take financial responsibility for his children.
Now, come on, you know when it get good, you say anything, huh? You probably even said it.
Obvious that a woman should have a single sexual partner.
It's natural for you to ask why you got 9 kids.
Obvious that parents are solely responsible for the upbringing and raising of a child. Obvious, of course, under the predominance of a nuclear family as the only valid mode of sexual expression, child rearing, or resource distribution.
That's what ideology tries to do.
Now, of course, all this ideological flim-flam is obscured by the fact that the audience is the loudest voice on the show, and the audience gets their free tickets to be on the show, so it doesn't seem like they're a cabal of ideologues, right? What are they even doing there? The manufacture of vulgarity on talk shows is not a pure exercise of force or coercion from which the show's guests and viewers emerge as hapless victims. No talk show is or can be produced without the consent as well as the active or vicarious participation of its audiences.
Wait a minute. Just tell me what door they're coming out of.
But the second code that we're going to talk about today is the negotiated code, which Paul says might be what most audiences are doing when they're watching TV.
And the true meaning of it will depend on what meaning people make of it.
In this code, the totalizing effect of the dominant ideology is accepted generally, but open to looser interpretations on the ground. Negotiated codes operate through what we might call particular or situated logics. The simplest example of a negotiated code is that which governs the response of a worker to the notion of an industrial relations bill limiting the right to strike or to arguments for wage freeze. At the level of the national interest economic debate, he may adopt the hegemonic definition, agreeing that we all must pay ourselves less in order to combat inflation, etc. This, however, may have little or no relationship to his willingness to go on strike for better pay and conditions, or to oppose the industrial relations bill at the level of his shop floor or union organization. But the most visceral example for me would be the childhood insults that we lobbed at each other in parks and playgrounds. A whole separate video could be made about the dirty dozens, a form of black ritual insult.
I'm from the Bronx, and in the Bronx, in school, it's something that we do is called cutting ass. A lot of people say roasting or flaming, but we call it cutting ass.
As kids, we would be together in parks and playgrounds, and people would just insult each other.
When I was like in 6th grade, they used to flame my life. And it got to the point that I used to be like, nah, I'm about to get my jokes up.
Your Mama's on Welfare would frequently be a joke that comes near the end of the session. I'm not sure how they were like totally organized. We didn't all end up fighting, so there was a way that it came to a conclusion. And in my case,
I'm from the Bronx.
These playgrounds and parks were in housing projects, which is to say that nearly all of our mamas were on welfare. So having come to terms with this in our own ways internally, the moral failure of poverty was still leveraged for the sake of the genre.
I don't even gotta look at your face. I would just say something about your moms. Fuck your moms. Nothing is off limit.
The moment of trying to use an insult, you grasp the dominant ideology, although like your personal life clearly flies in the face of that.
Hi, Big Bird. Hi, Elma.
So in terms of tabloid television, it's important to note that all these issues that people see on screen, the misbehaved teens who need to get pregnant, the baby mama, baby fathers, most of these problems are problems of the lower classes or underrepresented social groups. And unlike the hosts, the production teams, the executive producers, who exert a lot of energy into making sure we have a somewhat clear storyline.
And when Universal bought us, they said, from now on, only crazy.
The audiences cannot be said to have the same ideological positions as people who run the shows. I watched them in the project. This is a very much a negotiated situation that we're looking at here. But more specifically, DNA tests admissible in the court of law from Maury's own DNA Diagnostic Center are $500 currently. So if you happen to, for whatever reason, say a cut of your welfare benefits, need to prove paternity somewhere, you can skip the $500 by simply displaying yourself on screen. And there's something to be said about the effect of ridicule on these TV shows, but this is like pre-Facebook or pre-social media. So you'd have to catch that one person you know in this daily slog of Maury episodes and remember them for the rest of your life if it was going to matter. And for a free dinner and a hotel stay in New York City, it's doubtful that in these moments guests are concerned with the tendency towards stereotype.
If I had to guess, it's for so many of our guests, no one ever asks them a question. They're not in a job where their opinion is valued. It's like for one day in their life, people are really paying attention.
So finally we get to the last mode of decoding, and that's the oppositional reading.
You have created a narrative of I am an angry black woman who is scared off the little white girl.
Where the audience fully understands the meaning intended by the program generally, but processes that message within an alternative framework of knowledge, in what Hall calls a globally contrary way. It is possible for a viewer perfectly to understand the literal and connotative inflection given to an event, but to determine to decode the message in a globally contrary way. He detotalizes the message in the preferred code in order to retotalize the message within some alternative framework of knowledge. This is the case of a viewer who listens to a debate on the need to limit wages, but who reads every mention of the national interest as class interest. He is operating with what we must call an oppositional code. So this is clearly what was at play within my welfare assertions. And we can apply this in a number of contexts. For example, a certain turn of the millennium commercial for One Judge Judy, which presents a new Judy for a new century.
Judge Judy sees what other judges can't see. Still think she's like other judges? Think again.
Try that in heels.
Judge Judy.
Applying the dominant codes yields a certain excitement for the laser-like focus of our post-Y2K judge. This digital age Judy is a powerful, precise, capable woman who can handle any defense, even in heels. But another reading turns what could be excitement into a sort of ridicule. The intensity and incongruity of all the effects sort of undermine the hard-nosed, no-nonsense character of the cranky benchmensch. In an inexplicable and unflattering approximation of CSI, the Judy vision is articulated by rotating concentric circles. Is she a robot? A more acutely contrary decoding begs the question, why is she a martial artist? We could attempt to solve this as some sort of like shitty rehashing of like the Matrix slow-mo effect. But then there's the weird like Orientalist undercurrent that a lot of post-apocalypse media has. And even if we were to use this line of logic, it wouldn't really excuse the Hong Kong Phooey riff that happens in the background. That dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Like kung fu fighting. So even in this very specific rendering of the future on an American judge show, there's particular fantasies about Asia. We can see in this part of what Ann Chang described as ornamentalism, the particular tendency of the West to reduce Asia or ideas about Asia to a set of decadent ornaments.
There are 4 squares of beaded squares and then the one long square. And there's a weird kind of cyborg quality to that, almost like buttons.
On the one hand, he looks sort of geometric in that kind of technological way. I think it also gestures to a kind of Chinese hieroglyphic. One of the things that I explore in the book is the question, how is it that Asiatic femininity can be at once, at the same time, be something regressive and atavistic and futuristic, cyborg, the artificial life.
The cultural space of the East to a sort of catatonia, an unfeeling, precise, nearly robotic humanoid behavior, primed for a future filled with unfeeling workers.
Every civilization was built off the back of a disposable workforce.
The side nets are still in place.
In Chang's words, the yellow woman is an, if not the, original cyborg.
Anita, you can stop now.
Now, this is just a commercial and the end of the video, so it's not here that we're going to launch into a rage against tabloid television on grounds of Orientalism.
I'm of mixed race, and I've struggled my whole life as to whether I'm Chinese, whether I'm black. But you know what? It doesn't matter.
What you are is Chinegro.
Chinegro.
Chinegro, there you go.
Chinegro? What the f is a Chinegro?
Chinegro is you.
What? That's some bullshit.
But it's clear that this commercial, in its rapturous misfiring, is trying to tell us something vaguely digital. What we receive, however, is dependent on our decoding.
Try that in heels.
So beyond the reception practices of children and the hypothetical responses of some British laborers, the essay gives us a way to appreciate the pivotal interconnection between societal structures and processes and Form 1 symbolic structures. Millionaire Montel Williams' concern for the average taxpayer, Jerry Springer's yellow journalism, and Judge Mathis's carceral concern for his community all look a lot more interesting in this context. Looking back at the Western, Hall says, in part, what the production of the Western genre codes achieved was the transformation of a real historical West selectively into the symbolic or mythical West. It is the land of men, of independent men, isolated in their confrontations with nature or evil. So it's clear that after some decades, my grandmother's articulation of "it's just entertainment" constituted a bit of a negotiated reading. She knew my discomfort was valid in some way, but still wanted to continue enjoying the show, which by all means go ahead. That's no shade, don't play with me.
What do you think life's all about?
The essay both reorients the dominant modes of thinking about media away from producers and consumers to a process of encoding decoding, riddled with distortions that opens up a whole world of interpretations. It asks, how many crucial kinds of meaning were in fact transmitted while researchers were busy counting the bodies?
Wait till I get a real one.
Helene Shugart has a few ideas, and we'll dive into those in our next video when I can breathe. It was a beat, it's cute. Yeah, I'm gonna put some B-roll because she's tired. Like, Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.